totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Make sure you subscribe and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Links to all the social media sites at bookedonrock.com. Also, subscribe to the email newsletter at bookedonrock.com for all the latest episodes, blogs, videos, and more. Man, am I excited to have this guest. He is David Spero. David was one of the pioneering DJs of the then new FM format in radio, a free form limited only by the DJ's imagination. He left radio in 1973 to become the manager for Michael Stanley, and would eventually go on to manage the biggest names in rock, including Joe Walsh, Cat Stevens, Dickey Betts, Colin Young, Kenny Loggins, Richie Furay, Simon Kirke and Paul Rodgers of Bad Company, and many, many others. He's friends to his many famous rockers, including Jackson Browne, Mark Farner, Al Kooper, and Harry Nilsson. Man, does he have some stories to tell. His book is called A Life in the Wings, My 60-Year Love Affair with Rock and Roll, a memoir. David's about to share some of those amazing stories with us, including how he helped to facilitate the 90s Eagles reunion. He's got another wild story about working with Vanilla Ice. So let's get to it now. Here is David Spero. David, welcome to the podcast.
Oh man, it's nice to be here. You've had a lot of my friends, it looks like,
on the show. Yes, yeah. I'm sure, and I really appreciate you being here because you just told me you literally just sat down.
I had dinner last night with Simon Kirke from Bad Company.
Oh, very cool.
Got on the plane this afternoon, and I'm watching my watch on the freeway, and it's like, phew, made it.
Tell us where you're from and how your dad played a huge role in getting you started in the entertainment business.
Well, my dad had a TV show called Upbeat that he was the producer of. And Upbeat was like the antithesis of, like Dick Clark, American Bandstand. American Bandstand would have like one artist and 10 dance songs, during the show. And my dad's idea was to take Top 40 radio and put it on TV. So he was like, well, let's have Otis Redding play with Mitch Ryder, and let's have, Bobby Goldsboro do a song with Leslie Gore and all that kind of stuff. And it started in 1964. I can't think of a band during that era that didn't do the show. Oh, maybe the 13th Floor Elevators. No, they did it. But anyhow, Beatles, Stones, Who, Kinks, all the classic guys. And it was on from 64 to 71, and it was 13. I was 13 when it started, and I became the cue card kid. So I would write out what the host would say and hold it next to the camera lens, and my other job was I paid the band and the dancers. So that was not a bad part of it, which got me close with a lot of those artists throughout the years that came back again and again and again.
Yeah. Who are some of the artists that stand out to you? Because you mentioned Otis Redding, and that was his last ever appearance.
Yeah. He was on his way to Madison, Wisconsin afterwards, and died on the plane crash, in the plane crash.
Yeah.
It was also like the very first TV appearance of Simon and Garfunkel. Nobody had ever seen them. It was the only TV appearance of Velvet Underground.
That's mentioned in the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Steven Tyler, this is great. Of Aerosmith, but not yet.
Right. He had a band called Chain Reaction. They were out of Boston, of course, and he was the drummer. And they were on Columbia, which now that I think of it, that's probably how Aerosmith ended up on Columbia. And they did the show 2 or 3 times. So I'd met, and we're not that far away in age, and I gave him a little help in his personal career at one point. And he's still a pal.
Yeah, what was he like back then?
I mean, we were both pretty dorky,
Yeah.
If it wasn't for music,
Yeah,
we'd be McDonald's managers.
Could you tell though, like this is going to be he's going to be
No,
something special. No, you couldn't
no.
tell at that time.
I remember I remember I really liked one of the songs they had. I don't remember what it was, but I mean, it wasn't earth shattering. It was like, wow, that's a pretty good song, you know?
What was Cleveland like growing up? And were you born and raised in Cleveland?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What was Cleveland like growing up?
Well, you know, in the 50s and 60s, it was still very racist. We would have like artists from the show come over to the house, you know, Otis or Marvin Gaye or, you know, somebody like that. And we actually had friends that weren't allowed to come to our house because we had, you know, black people in our house. And their parents weren't really good with that. I mean, this is Shaker Heights, Ohio, about as white as it got, you know.
What is some of the things you learned from your dad watching him work? People thought highly, not just of his talents, but just a great guy, right? People loved him as a person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the Rock Hall gave the Upbeat Show an award and a plaque where it was you know, shot at the TV station. And Jerry Butler, who was a pretty big R&B artist, had a couple crossover hits, was also with the Impressions for a long time. He did a really nice speech. And he said the one thing in all the years he'd been doing the show, which was from the beginning to the end, and he remained friends with my dad until my dad's passing. He said, you know, Herman Spero treated everybody the same, whether they were the Beatles or the Bebops. You know, he said he treated everyone as if they were the most important person on the show that day. And he said, you know, as a young kid growing up, it meant quite a lot, you know, to have the respect of a guy with and you know, Upbeat wasn't just a show in Cleveland. It was in 105 markets. It was also in London. It was also in Australia at one point. So yeah, it was easy to get acts on the show because the record labels loved it. You know, free exposure for their band. And there's some guys like the Lovin' Spoonful, Tommy James and the Shondells, Bobby Goldsboro, Leslie Gore. Every one of their songs they debuted on Upbeat. Everyone. Even, I mean, Aretha did Respect on Upbeat before she had even recorded it as a single. It was an album track. She went and re-recorded it for the single. So it did make a big impact on record sales across the country.
I would think so. Is Upbeat available in like box set version? Was it ever released?
No. Unfortunately, as much as it was a national show, it was done locally with a local mentality. And, you know, nobody thought at the time that it was important to get releases signed by the artists, to put it out. And I'd had discussions with Dick Clark about this, you know, before he passed away, on what the best way to do it was. And he said, look, you're going to have to go to like everybody in the Guess Who and have them sign it because they're all on it. You know, you can't just go get like Burton Cummings or something like that. And it was just overwhelming. And we have our own little showings at home here.
So you've got all the footage.
A bunch of it.
Yeah.
Well, not out. No, there were greatest hits shows that were kept every year, but I think there's only one full show that exists. But they would just keep clips because, you know, when Three Dog Night would come in, they'd do like 7 songs, but on that one show, you'd only see maybe 1 or 2. And then 3 weeks later, here's Three Dog Night again, wearing the same clothes, doing 2 other songs. And so, you know, we just kept like the greatest hits. He was very open to, and the labels knew it. So they took full advantage of the fact that he wanted upcoming people that may or may not, you know, make it. You know, he was more than happy to give them their first exposure. And the show was also a stopping ground for every Motown act. They'd come down from Detroit to do the Upbeat Show on their way to go do the Ed Sullivan Show. So this was the big dress rehearsal. You know, they could check out the choreography. You know, they'd check out how the clothes wore, all of that kind of stuff to see how it would look on the Sullivan Show.
This is the pre-MTV days. Yeah. Was so when you get on TV.
TV was, right. Yeah. This was, And, a lot of shows had their own local version of American Bandstand, but there was no other until Shindig and Hullabaloo came along. There was no other show like Upbeat at the time. And Hullabaloo was definitely sampled on the Upbeat show. Just a lot of how they did the sets and all of that stuff. You can tell they were very influenced by it.
Well, as we transition into your radio career, I'm just thinking Alan Freed. Obviously, he's got the Cleveland roots there. The whole reason that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is there is because he put on what is considered the first rock and roll concert ever, right? And it was in Cleveland.
And he named it. I mean, he's the one who said, "This is rock and roll, baby." Nobody had uttered those words before Alan Freed. I met him a few times. I know his son very, very well. There was another guy who was there at the same time, a guy named Bill Randall. And Bill was the guy who he gets credit for being the first person to bring Elvis north of the Mason-Dixon line. He brought him up here to do shows at high schools and stuff in Cleveland. And that's how he broke him. Then he broke him on the radio. There's been a lot. And then, WMMS at its height, we could sell 1 million records in the Cleveland ADA. I mean, it was absolutely crazy. Led Zeppelin 4, 1 million records. David Bowie, 1 million records. Humble Pie, 1 million records. And they may top out at like 1.3 for the whole country. That's how strong MMS was in the time.
Well, there's a famous story about Rush, and I think this was literally weeks after you left, I think, in 76.
Yeah.
And
because I would have never played them.
Oh, really? Okay. So
I can't stand that guy's voice.
Oh, that's hilarious, because they thought it was Led Zeppelin when it was played on MMS. Wow.
And that was Donna Halper. She was the one that fell in love with that record and just played the hell out of it.
But see, that speaks to, that's what radio was in those days. Each individual DJ could decide what was going to be played.
I started playing the first Bruce album because I was also at the time managing an artist named Michael Stanley and the Michael Stanley Band. And Bruce had played a bunch of shows with us. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. You're pretty good, kid.
He's pretty good.
So I started playing it on the radio, and then other guys on the station picked up on it. And I left right before Born to Run. And Kid Leo jumped all over Born to Run. And that's when Bruce just exploded. There's another guy, Platinum in Cleveland.
So you're playing stuff off the first two albums, Greetings from Asbury Park and
the E Street album.
Yeah, E Street,
which
Shuffle.
to me that's my favorite. I think for me that's my favorite Springsteen album. This is the second album. I just think some of those tracks just live on. I heard Sandy on the radio on the way home here today.
Oh, great!
I'm like, what an incredibly crafted song, and the story is told so well. When I was at the Rock Hall, I did an interview with Dion once, and I said to him, you make, I love your songs because of these little vignettes, they're just great little stories. And he said, yeah, that's what I do. I do vignettes. He says, but Bruce Springsteen, man, that guy can write a song. He writes in cinematic,
yes,
the biggest screen possible.
Film noir, right?
Yeah.
Like Born to Run, the song titles are like titles of film noir movies.
Right, exactly. But he said, he says, let's look at one line from one song. The screen door slammed. He said, now that door was probably blue and green and yellow and white, and that little hook on it probably never fit quite right, and Bruce had gone through that door on the best days of his life, and he'd gone through that door on the worst days of his life. And that little screen part that Dad had to fix every weekend because all the bugs came through there. He said, that's one line in the song. Look at the vision just from that door as to what the possibilities are.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. The chapter in your book is titled, That's Why God Made the Radio. So that's where we start getting into your radio career. When was that moment where you said, I want to be that guy on the radio?
Yeah, it was listening to Top 40 around the time the Beatles came out. And I had my woolen sack tape recorder, and I used to, and my dad got every album that came out. for the TV show, so he'd bring everything home to me and my brothers. So we had everything. So I used to do my radio shows. I used to do these radio shows on my tape recorder on WDAS, my initial. And
I did the same thing.
of course, And then when I was like 16, I was working at this clothing store. It was like the cool clothing store, like the Beatles went there. It was all stuff that came from Carnaby Street. So all the acts from Upbeat would go there to get cool clothes to wear on the show. And they also dressed the host and the dancers and stuff like that. And I used to sit in there, and one of my jobs was to play records in the store. And eventually the guy who owned it said, look, there's a radio station in town. I can give them $25 an hour, and you can be on from midnight until 6 a.m. if you want, and just talk about the store every now and then. I said, well, that sounds pretty cool. So I did it. I think that went on for about 8 or 9 months. And I was just playing whatever I wanted. And if there was someone from Upbeat, I'd bring them over to the show because it was Friday and Saturday night. So, one night, Jimmy Page comes over, and we're playing all these old blues things. And it's the first time he ever played a Led Zeppelin track, because he was there with the new Yardbirds, fulfilling all the Yardbirds commitments. But he had the demo with him. And he said, you want to hear something really cool? And oh my God, I'd never heard anything like that before.
That was the stuff that would be on the first album?
Yeah, that was the first Zeppelin album. And then all of a sudden, they were talking about a station starting in Cleveland. And Don Imus, who was a huge Cleveland DJ before he went to New York and became an unbelievably huge DJ, my dad was doing a TV show with him in Cleveland. He said, so you should get on this station. And I'm like, well, how am I going to do that? He said, well, let me take care of it for you. Because he was on the AM of that FM. And he told them, like, oh, David and I, we did radio up in Michigan. We did radio together out in the West Coast. He's like, perfect for this. And it's Don Imus. So, he's their meal ticket. And if he says do it, they did it. And of course, I didn't even know how to run a board by then, because at the station I was at, it was a union station, so I couldn't touch the dials. So, but the news station I was going to, WNCR, they're like, oh, well, is this the same kind of a board you used to work in? And blah, blah, blah. Like, I literally I had my meeting on Friday. I started Monday morning at 6 a.m. They gave me the morning show because I had more experience than anybody.
Yeah.
And I did. I mean, I had a radio sensibility. I'd done it for, 8 to 10 months every week. So, I mean, I really had a flow. I learned the art of the segue really quick, and found how cool it was to put like 6 or 7 songs together in a row that you never knew when one started and one ended. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, that was cool.
Absolutely. And for those who are too young to even understand this, because this is, to me, this is why I fell in love with FM rock radio, is that there was a time, it was an art form, like you say, learning how to do the segue. It to me, I always viewed it as an art form, and I used to study every disc jockey. Like, I like his style, I like how he segues. So if you could talk about what rock radio was like in the early days of FM rock radio.
Well, everybody kind of had their own style. I was kind of known as the acoustic guy. I played a lot of Cat Stevens and Crosby, Stills and Nash and James Taylor and Joni Mitchell and, a lot of that stuff. But then a ton of Beatles, a ton of Stones, a ton of The Who, Kinks. Probably nobody ever played more Kinks than I did. The Zombies. I mean, but then I, also loved Janis Joplin, and I loved the first Blood, Sweat and Tears record, and I loved the first Boz Scaggs record, and then when the Allman Brothers hit, so, and we kind of discovered Bowie at WMMS, which was the station I went to. he was so big that he sold out a 3,000 seat hall here. And it was the first date on his first ever US tour. He then went on to other cities where he was playing in front of 200 to 300 people a night, and came back to Cleveland for the last 2 dates of his tour, where he sold out the 10,000 seater twice. So he did 24,000 tickets in Cleveland, where he was doing less than 500 in any market, all due to the radio. You know, we made Bowie God. You know, it was like that with Humble Pie and Mott the Hoople and Lou Reed and Yes and Genesis. So many of these bands that went on to have huge careers have Cleveland to thank for a lot of it. WMMS was the biggest radio station in the country for probably 6-7 years running. Rolling Stone voted it the #1 radio station in the country.
When did your career begin there?
Well, Billy Bass, who was the program director at WNCR, he called me into the office one day and he said, "Hey, listen, WHK-FM is going to become a station like WNCR." And we were having some trouble there at NCR. All of a sudden, the general manager thought, you know, we needed to wear suits and ties like the AM DJs did. And that they didn't think it was right that we, you know, smoke pot in the studio, and that we, you know, had, you know, open bottles of alcohol and, you know, everything that went along with that. But we felt that was the best way to create our music. You know, like you said, it's an art form. And MMS was offering this blank palette to do whatever we wanted. And so Billy and I and one other guy from the station, Martin Perlick, we went over and started WMMS. And we just kind of took it up a notch or two. You know, it was we had zero restrictions there. You know, we had a clock we had to follow when we were at WNCR. They didn't really want us talking too much about the artists and stuff like that. And MMS just became that thing where, you know, it was really cool to play Joni Mitchell into Miles Davis into Led Zeppelin. And it worked. At MMS, I started, I did the mornings for the first year I was there, and then I went to 2 to 6 p.m. And from 2 to 4, I think it was once or twice a week, I would have guests. You know, I'd have Loggins and Mesita, I'd have Paul Simon, I'd have Nicky Hopkins, I'd have, you know, Linda Ronstadt, whoever it was. And I just let them come and take over 2 hours of my show and play what they wanted to hear. So it was, we had no idea what we were doing. You know, we were getting free records and free T-shirts and free pot.
That's rock and roll.
What more do you need, you know?
Yeah, because it's amazing to think at one time the FM airwave was just something like the government forced the owners of these stations, like, you got an FM wave, do something with it. Oh, I don't, you know, well, I guess. You know, Tom Donahue in San Fran, right?
Yeah, I think it was in 68 or 69 when they came up with the law that you can't run the same programming on AM and FM.
That was it.
Yeah, so they had to do something. That first station I was on, WXCN, where I was doing midnight to whenever I fell asleep, they would have like the Polish hour, followed by the German hour, followed by the, you know, this hour and all that, and I was like the hippie hours. But by the time we got to MMS, we were pretty fine-tuned in really making statements through the music. And we were very well respected throughout the musical community, where people went out of their way to make sure we got the exclusive. And that became a big part of who we were.
I mentioned Tom Donahue real quickly for those who may not know, but he's the one who set up like the first, quote unquote, first FM rock station, I think, because it was in an old church in San Francisco. Yeah.
Well, you know, and the weird thing about that is we never heard of Tom Donahue in Cleveland. We had no idea what he was doing. We never heard of what was going on at BCN in Boston, or
there was no internet back then.
MMR in Philadelphia. We didn't even know these other stations existed. You know, we had no way of knowing until a Billboard type magazine, which was actually 6 pieces of paper stapled together, called Walrus Report, came out. and everybody was talking about what they were playing and what was happening. And I went to record stores and radio stations. All of a sudden we'll find out, wow, who's this Bonnie Raitt? They're raving about her in Kansas City or whatever, it's like,
Yeah.
And they're like calling us David Bowie. What are you playing off of it? My God, we don't hear anything on this record.
Yeah.
It's like, well, like everything.
Yeah. It was when the internet came, the world got so much smaller. But in those days it was hitting market to market to market, because like you say, you could become huge in one part of the country, but nobody knows who you are on the other side.
Exactly.
But what happened to FM rock radio? I mean, when did it start? Yeah, that's the thing that drove me nuts. Playlist. Why? Why? Because people always ask, why they used to ask me all the time, why do you guys play the same music all the time over and over and over again? And just to try to break it down into simple terms, it wasn't that easy. It's all designed to get ratings based on when people are listening, like 20 minutes at a time, right?
And who cares?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want to play Look at You, Look at Me by Dave Mason. I don't care what time of the day it is. All of a sudden that's what I'm feeling. And I have a great segue going into, Any Day by Derek and the Dominoes. I can't wait to try. And, it's like, I have a radio station in my head that's constantly going. I mean, there's songs in my every breath I take is playing in my head right now. I just hear songs, and it's like I wish I had an outlet to like go do all these segues, because
the beautiful thing is you were at least around during a time when you could do it. Because when I got into it in the mid 90s, I mean, I remember one time filling in the afternoon, and I played I played a Ted Nugent song. Maybe it was Stranglehold or whatever, and all of a sudden the program director like leaps out of his office, like, watch with the day parts. And I'm like, what's a day part?
Yeah, exactly.
And he's all the heavier songs are played at night. Heavier songs are played at night. We got to part those out. And okay.
I mean, for us, I can honestly say it wasn't a playlist that stopped me. That stopped me. It was that all of a sudden albums would come in and there'd like be asterisks on tracks that these are the only 3 songs from this album you could play. And it's like, what are you talking about? This song fits perfectly with what I'm about to do.
You were making a ton of money off of advertising, weren't you? I mean, it wasn't like...
By that time, yeah.
I mean, there wasn't a need to.
Buzzard, it'd become the Buzzard. At one point, there was a survey done, and the Buzzard was more well-known in a 100-mile radius of WMMS, better known than the Arches at McDonald's.
Wow.
I mean, just crazy things that we'd be getting back from just how big the station was.
So,
and of course, the bigger it got, that's when all of a sudden it had to be, decisions were made by the higher ups that, we need to kind of conform to a format.
But if anything else, it'd be like, you guys are doing awesome. Keep doing what you're doing.
Exactly.
The consultants, right? That's the thing. The guys up in the big...
That's what it was. Yeah.
Business. Yeah.
And I mean, I remember at MMS, we used to refuse sponsors that wanted us to play jingles. And at one point, I was invited down to Atlanta by Coca-Cola, and they said, well, show us what kind of a spot would you want on the air? And so I created this spot, with their music in the background, but a laid back version of it, not, and I came up with a tagline that I didn't realize would end up being one of their taglines. Their tagline was, "It's the real thing." And I said, "It's the real thing." Really? And it ended up becoming the national, FM commercial. So we made changes not just for us. We were changing the world as far as how they were doing stuff, because jingles just ruined everything.
Yeah, jingles. Well, KRP. I mean, you saw KRP in Cincinnati.
Exactly.
Red Wiggler's commercial. I mean, that's probably that's the best example. No. And it's like, as funny as that was, that's kind of really what it was.
I mean, I had I got a free waterbed that I think we used until 2 years ago while I was on the radio for doing, waterbed commercials. It's like, oh, okay, well, we'll give you the waterbed and the dresser and the things again, the little tables and the whole bed and all that. I mean, we got a million mattresses over the years, but we kept. I think it's been like 2 or 3 years. We've been married 45 years, so we had it like 42 years.
Yes, that's great. I remember waterbeds too.
We still have the furniture.
I love it. So
our son hadn't slept in a non-water bed until like he was like at a hotel or something like that. We even had a water crib.
A water crib.
A water crib.
Can FM rock radio be saved at this point? I mean,
no.
No. Is it just because there are too many other options now?
Well, there's so many places to go. I mean, just look at XM radio. I have like 8 or 10 stations that are saved, and there's still 180 more that I don't even pay attention to. And no one's going to sit it. I was hoping when XM started that they were going to do the radio we used to do. It was set up for it perfectly.
Yes.
And then I listened to, deep tracks, and they're playing Let It Be. In what world is Let It Be a deep track? And I've had Steve Leeds, who's one of the programmers over there. I've had hours of conversations with him, and then all of a sudden, somebody new must have come in over the last few weeks, because, boy, I'm hearing a lot of Procol Harum. I'm hearing a lot of Dire Straits. I'm hearing tracks from people I forgot about 25 years ago, and it's really cool. And then tomorrow you get in the car and there it is again, and it's like, oh man.
Well, that's what I was going to say too. Is like, if you listen long enough, you're like, oh, there's a playlist, because now I just heard the same song yesterday.
In rotation.
It's in rotation.
It goes.
They had some great DJs there. A lot of the old New York DJs.
Yeah,
a lot of really good.
Well,
I gotta have to get it again. I ran out. My subscription ran out. I should renew it, because that was the station I always listened to. Yeah,
well, go back now. You can get your 3 months free.
Yeah, it's in my car. Like, you could get it. You just have to.
I know. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
it's You'd think that one of those stations, they could just say, okay, that's, and Kid Leo does. Him and Miami Steve are really good buds, so he pretty much runs the underground garage.
Jim
Ladd.
Yeah, he picks his own music.
Deep tracks.
Yeah, he picks his own. Yeah, he's a rarity. He's allowed to pick his own tracks.
Right. But he's only, I've been out when he's doing his shows on the West Coast, and I've taken artists over there and stuff, and he can play whatever he wants within the spectrum of songs.
Okay.
So you could like play anything you want. And he goes, well, anything that's on my expanded list. He said, if there's something I really want to play, I just like text him and say, I'm putting this in the show tonight. And 99% of the times they'll say, okay.
It was funny. Tom Petty's The Last DJ, that whole song was about just that, like corporate radio ruining radio, and radio stations were playing it. It's like, you guys know that Tom Petty's making fun of us here. Like, he thinks we suck.
Yeah.
That's okay, but he's popular. Play it. And
right. Tom was when we did the Buffalo Springfield reunion. I don't remember when we did it. I'm bad with years, but Tom came to 3 or 4 of the shows, and one afternoon we were just sitting around. We were talking about segues and stuff, and I've said, Tom, the one thing you're missing is segues. And he's like, what do you mean? And I told him, I said, I gave him 6 examples. Go play these, and when you mix them together, because Tom was the only one of those celeb guys that actually listened to the music while he did the show. Everybody else just does their wraparounds. Yeah. But Tom was really into actually being the DJ and doing the show.
That's the Buried Treasure show, right? On Sirius XM. He had his own radio show.
Yeah, it's still on, which is great.
Is it still on?
I know if I hear Emmett Rhodes or something, oh, it's Tom's show.
Oh, yeah.
He played all the cool stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah, I love his show. And when Bob Dylan was doing his radio show, which was so esoteric, but it was worth listening to his raps in between the songs. Tom was the only one that was really doing free form, complete free form. He played whatever the hell he wanted, and most of it was from his record collection.
Well, there's a lot more to your career after radio, so let's get to that. David Spero. David Spero is our guest. The book is called A Life in the Wings, My 60-Year Love Affair with Rock and Roll, a memoir. It's written by David and Adrian Zonneville.
Right.
We want to get his name in there. You've been great friends with Joe Walsh for many years. When did you meet him, and how did you guys strike up a friendship?
He had a band called the Measles before the James Gang. And of course, their advertising always said, "Catch the measles." Joe's sense of humor. And they were a house band on the Upbeat Show at one point. And Joe and I just hit it off. And when he started the gang, I used to hang out at Kent all the time and watch the shows and hang out. And as it got bigger and bigger and bigger, we've never been out of touch, never, to this day. And he was the one that I was on the air, and he was playing on this album by the Michael Stanley band. Well, it was just Michael Stanley at the time, and Joe was a guitar player, and he brought in Kenny Passarelli and Joe Vitale, who all became Barnstorm at one point. And then Todd Rundgren is on the record, and Jay Giles is on the record, and Richie Furay is on the record. And all these guys, it was, a real kind of super session thing. And Joe said, "So here's the plan. He said, you're not going to be doing radio when you're like 22 or 23, right?" I said, "Probably not." He says, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know." Fine. Something will happen, He says, "Well, I want you to manage this guy, Michael Stanley." I'd never met him or anything. I said, "But I don't know anything about that." He says, "Right. So you're going to come out to California, and you'll hang with my manager for a little bit, and he's going to show you the ropes. And then at some point, I'll give you a call, and you'll be my manager." And it happened just like that.
Just like that.
It really did. It was. It wasn't long after that I kind of took the 80s music-wise was just terrible. I mean, it's just, there was nothing there for me. It was all these faceless bands. And although I did hear Sister Christian today and thought, what a great production.
Yeah. Yes, Night Ranger.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was 74 when you took a break from radio and you managed Michael Stanley, who is from Cleveland.
And that went until like 77, 78. Then I had like one last radio fling at a station called M105 in Cleveland, and I had a 1-year contract, and they wanted me to come back, and we just could never get the contract together because I was closer to MMS than any other station had gotten in Cleveland because I knew how to play their game, and it worked, but I never got the 2nd-year contract, and I ended up taking a gig at Columbia Pictures.
Yeah, what was your specific job there? I was trying to figure that out. You were there for a while.
Well, it started. My wife worked with a lady whose husband was the branch manager of Columbia Pictures for the Midwest out of Cleveland, and the reason it's a memoir is because sometimes I don't remember everything exactly, but we, I think we were having dinner with them one night, and he's like, "Well, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, nothing." He says, "Well, you want to come and work here?" And I said, "What would I do?" He goes, "I don't know. We'll invent a job for you."
I mean, this is the picture business. We're talking movies, or we're talking, movies,
I mean, right? So I mean, I some of my projects were Ghostbusters 1 and 2, and Karate Kid, and Gandhi, and Tootsie, and the Buddy Holly story, and La Bamba, and The Big Chill, and The Natural. These are all things that I ended up working with, and I worked on the sales team. So I would, I'd meet with like Sumner Redstone and make the deal for all of his Redstone theaters before he owned Viacom.
Okay. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
had a theater company, and I just kind of fell into it for, I don't know, like a dozen years or something. I don't remember. And then Joe called. They wanted me to move to Chicago and take over a much bigger territory out of Chicago. And I think my son was like a junior in high school or something. It's like, well, we don't want to move. And, anyhow, I hadn't given them an answer. And out of nowhere, Joe calls and he says, "You ready?" And I said, "For what?" He said, "Well, you're going to manage me, right?" I said, "Sure."
1991, right? Am I right on the year? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ordinary Average Guy album.
Yeah. And he said, well, okay, there'll be a plane ticket tomorrow. Come on out. So I went out there not knowing what I was getting myself into. And, Joe had led me to believe that his whole team, his lawyer, his business manager, all the consultants he had working for him, that he had told them all that about me and that's why he wanted me and all that. When he finally woke up that day, when I was waiting for him at the house, he said, "You ready?" And I said, "Well, for what?" And he said, "Well, we got meetings this afternoon." I'm like, "Well, you could have told me, And he's like, "Oh, well, I figured, I said, "Well, I thought we were going to have a chance to talk." And he goes, "Well, we'll talk in the car." 20-minute ride,
I can picture him. He's got that distinctive voice too.
Oh yeah, and all we did was like bullshit. We didn't talk about any.
And I'm in this meeting and there. So what's the plan? The guy said. For what? Well, you're Joe's manager. What's the plan? That's why. This is the first I'm hearing about everything because Joe called me yesterday. "Can you be in LA tomorrow?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Let's talk about management." And that's all I know. And they're like saying, "Well, what about this and that?" And it's like, I'd heard the Ordinary Average Guy album because Joe sent it to me. So I listened to it on the airplane, on my Walkman, and it was a great record. There was one of my all-time favorite songs called "All of a Sudden" is on that record.
Yes.
That song kills me every time I hear it.
And the title track is classic.
Oh
Joe,
yeah, it's
right?
it's
the bowling, the sound of the bowling ball.
It's what happened to the guy in Life's Been Good is he turned into an ordinary average guy.
And he really was, right? He was just your average. Yeah. I mean, he was really just seems like a really cool guy.
He's incredibly shy. I mean, painfully shy until he gets on a stage.
And an absolutely amazing guitarist.
Yeah. I mean, he can't, if you and me had dinner with him, he'd mostly just sit there. But then he goes out in front of 70,000 people and, he can be the clown. He can be whoever he wants to be.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. This story of the Eagles reuniting is just, it's a mind-blowing. So it starts.
Well, you know what? It's kind of like the Columbia Pictures gig. I've had this, I don't know what it is, just, shit falls in my lap.
Right. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, you just let things come. I guess this is a lesson. You can plan everything out, but.
Yeah. I mean, I've never gone after an artist. I've never gone and said, "Hey, I really want to manage you." It's just never happened. And with Before Hell Freezes Over, Joe's career was kind of not heading in the right direction. I mean, he wasn't even selling out Cleveland. He couldn't do 1,500 seats in Cleveland.
But was he at this time though? He was clean, right? As he gets
no.
Right? No. Okay, so he's still battling that.
There were moments. He had times where he would clean up and then he'd fall back, and it usually had to do with what the women in his life. Anytime the phone rang at night, I was sure it was somebody telling me that he's dead. And I he knows that. He knows where he was, and thankfully, since what was it, 3, I think it was, he's been totally clean and sober.
One day at a time, right? He's got that song from from AA.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's been very important to him. But so anyhow,
good for him.
I get a call one day, from Glenn Fry, who I hadn't seen in years, since Eagles days. So it'd been like 12 years, 13 years, something like that. And he calls me and he says, "Hey man, what are you doing?" I'm like, working. He says, "You still on the radio?" And I'm like, no. I manage Joe. And he's like, "Joe Cocker?" I said, "No, Walsh." He goes, "You know what? The hell with him. I don't even want to talk about that." And I'm like, "Well, what happened?" He says, "Well, I've been trying to get in touch with him for like a year now, and I was told he wants nothing to do with me." And I said, "Well, that's really weird because we were trying to get in touch with you. We were told the exact same thing." And, it all was going through the Eagles office, and, Joe and Glenn together, that can't be good. That's a train wreck waiting to happen. But I convinced them that 1 + 1 was 3. And that instead of Glenn playing a 400-seat club and Joe playing a 1,200-seat theater that he wasn't selling out, that we could go and play the Sheds. We can go play, the 20,000-seaters. And they're like, "Well, that's crazy. How can that be?" Because 1 and 1 is 3. And at one point, Glenn called and he said, "Hey, man, I've been thinking about your idea." And I'm like, "Yeah?" He says, I got a place to try it. And he was playing out at the, in LA at the Universal Amphitheater. And he had sold not even a half a house. And he said, "Maybe let's try this and see if it helps the show." So I set it up for them to go on the radio in LA do a morning show the next morning. And with Brian and I can't remember who was this. It's the #1 LA show.
KLOS?
Yeah, on KLOS.
Yeah.
And they announced the fact that this show was now going to become a Joe and Glenn show. And that they'll both be on stage the whole time, and they'll play a Joe song, a Glenn song, a Joe song, a Glenn song, a Joe song, a Glenn song. And before they were off the air, we sold out so fast. We never got to pull tickets for the winners that we were giving away. Wow. And he was like, "Oh my God, this really works." And I'm like, "Yeah, it does." It really works. And we ended up doing a whole year of that stuff. We were doing private shows for way too much money. And the shows that we were playing all across the country were fantastic. And then Irving Azoff called and said, "Henley wants to join in one of the shows, just, to have some fun." Glenn said, "No way. We're having way too much fun without him." And eventually called again, and we were doing a fundraiser in Aspen. And Don and Glenn both live in have homes in Aspen. Glenn, I think at the time, had 3 or 4 houses and condos there, and a studio and all kinds of stuff. And so I told Glenn, I said, "I got another call. Don wants to help out with the charity." He's like, "Okay." And, he had some stipulations, and they were all followed, and Don came out and killed it. I mean, the 3 of them with the band that it was backing them up, they did a 6-song set, and the people went out of their minds. That night, Irving Azoff had a huge party with everybody. I think everybody in Aspen was there. And at one point, Joe, Don, and Glenn disappeared. Nobody knew where they went. And my wife and I at one point just left the party and went back to the hotel. And next morning I had a call from Glenn, and he said, "There's a car downstairs. Don't take a shower. Just get in the car." I'm like, "What's going on?" "Just get in the car." And he hangs up. So I'm thinking, this can't be good. I felt that something happened, that he didn't even want to do Walsh and Fry anymore, So I called Joe's room. I said, "Hey, what happened last night?" He goes, "I'm sleeping." I said, "Well, I got a call from Glenn. He wants me to come over." "I'm sleeping." And he hangs up the phone. So now I'm really nervous. And I get over to Glenn's house and he throws like a legal pad and a pen at me and goes, okay, start writing. And he started giving me what became the basis of the Hell Freezes Over the contract. And
Wow.
I called it the Glenn Commandments, where everybody thinks that Henley was in charge of the Eagles. Never.
No.
Until Glenn passed away. It was always Glenn's band. Everybody would tell him what they thought, and Glenn made every final decision. Every song that was recorded was Glenn's decision. Anything that had to do with the Eagles. Glenn was Eagles. And it was a pretty cool situation. We put together this tour that originally was going to be like 9 or 10 shows. Irving did an amazing thing. He wanted to see if there was really any interest in the Eagles after 13 years. He came up with this idea to do this record called Common Thread. And he had gotten like every major country artist to do an Eagles song. And it sold like 3 million out of the box. It was crazy. And it was decided at that point that Travis Tritt had done Take It Easy on the album. So the very first time anybody saw the Eagles back together was the video we did with Travis Tritt. It was magic. It was like as if we shot it in a bar in LA, and they just started jamming while they were waiting for cameras to get set up and all this. And it was magic. It was like, oh my God, they were better than they ever were.
Even though Glenn's gone, that has really continued to this day. I mean, the Eagles are still going.
Yeah, I think they should have followed what the Dead did and done like Eagles Family and Friends. And then, if Jackson Browne or J.D. South or anybody wants to stop in and sing with them, let's do it, And that was the original plan. That was what they were going to do originally was do the Eagles Family and Friends, which made sense because of, Glenn's son being in the band and all that. No doubt it's a much better band musically than it was just, any band with Vince Gill is going to go up, with stature. He's just amazing.
But was it just
nobody has a voice like that, and nobody plays guitar like that.
From a marketing standpoint, though, they said just keep it Eagles.
Yeah, it was weird. I saw Joe right after the decision was made that they were going to go back out, and I said, "Well, but I thought you said it was going to be like Eagles Family and Friends," and he says, "Yeah, but then it was like maybe that just doesn't have the draw." But the Dead proved, they're out doing stadiums, and they don't call themselves the Grateful Dead. It's Dead and Friends.
And like did very well. Yeah,
still doing very well. They're wrapping it up this year, I hear.
Yep.
We were doing a Ringo tour once, and we got to the hotel, and the hotel, like the bar and everything, was right there where you check in and everything. The band, it was Ringo and Joe and Todd Rundgren and Burton Cummings and Dave Edmunds and Timothy Schmidt and Nils Lofgren. That was the band, and Zach Starkey was playing drums too. And we walk in there, and the Grateful Dead are all standing there. This is when Jerry was still alive. And they're like, "Oh my God, Ringo Starr! Oh my God, this is unbelievable!" And you're like, "Hey man, you want to go upstairs?" And and he's like, "No, I don't want to go upstairs." And they're talking and everything, and he says, he stands back and he looks at him and says, "So you're the Grateful Dead? Shouldn't you be in a van?" And then later on that evening, Bob Weir and Joe were just sitting talking guitars, and he was asking, "Well, how do you do this? How do you do it?" Joe said, "Well, I use all these different tunings." And Bob Weir's like, "Yeah, I can't deal with tunings."
Oh, man. Just to round it down here, I got to ask about Vanilla Ice, man. You had a working relationship with Vanilla Ice?
God.
When was this, and how the hell did this all come about? And how does this story end?
I found out just how white I was. Guy named Peter Lopez. We lost Peter a few years ago. He was Glenn's lawyer, and he was the Eagles' lawyer for certain things as well. And he said, "Hey, I need a favor." I said, "Okay." He says, "I'm working with this kid, Vanilla Ice, who at the time was just huge, massive." And he said, "But, he's got this manager who was taking 50%, and, they just screwing the kid left and right, and he has no idea, and he's got a new record he's got to deliver for Capitol, and they're very concerned that if he doesn't get new management, that they're not going to get this record done." So my wife and I took a trip down to Star Island and outside of Miami, and went to this house. It was like incredible. He had like a koi pond that went throughout the entire house. Like you're sitting on the couch and you're looking, there's glass on the floor, and there they go. They're all going. Oh, they're going to the kitchen. He had a full NBA basketball court in his house. He had to have $2 to $3 million worth of cars, and he was clueless. I mean, so we all went out to dinner and everything, and I'm talking to him, and he says, I made like $20 million when I was 19 years old. I said, "Well, that's good." He goes, I don't have a penny. I'm like, "How is that possible?" And then I find out, well, he bought his parents a $2 million home. He paid $5 million for this on the island. All those cars he paid cash for. Everywhere he played, he'd go take a whole floor of the hotel, bring all his friends, hire a private plane, party all day, all night. And he forgot one thing, that he had this partner named Uncle Sam, and he was way behind in taxes. And then I went with him to Capitol Records in New York to work on the new record, and he had all these samples that he hadn't gotten cleared, and I think the budget for the record was like, I don't know, $500,000 or something like that. Well, the samples alone were $750,000.
This is the follow-up to his big one, the Ice Baby. This is a follow-up.
Yeah, he couldn't understand. He's like, "Well, yeah, but I'm not singing their song. I'm just using this thing, part of it, And it's like, "Yeah, but that's their property. You got to pay for that." And he just couldn't get a grip on it. And then, like for 3 weeks, I couldn't get in touch with him. Call and call and call. And he comes back. I said, "Where you been?" He says, "Oh, well, this friend of mine put together a South American tour because I needed some money." I'm like, "Well, why don't I know about this?" "Well, because if you knew about it, I'd have to pay you." And I called Peter and I said, "Okay, well, that was a good experiment." But that world was so different, in a room with, Suge Knight and stuff like that, where he'd taken Vanilla Ice and literally hung him out the window by his feet if he didn't sign with him. Yeah, crazy shit. And he was going out with Madonna at the time, and he would tell me, "Man, I can't handle it. She's crazy." That was when that sex book came out that she did, where he's all over it, he's in it a lot. But it was an interesting foray into the dark side.
Well, look what you get. You get a nice story for your book. That's
one
of many.
A chapter,
One of many. Yeah, My Life in the Wings. It's been out since, I think, last spring, right?
July.
Was it July?
Yeah.
Yep. So people can get it through Amazon, all the usual places. I know it's available on Kindle. These days, you're still as busy as ever. I mean, you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a musical with Cat Stevens.
Fogarty?
Paul Rodgers has a new album coming out fourth quarter that he just finished. So we're working on all the all the post-production and all the pre-promotion for it.
One of the greatest voices in rock history.
Absolutely. And one of the greatest people in rock and roll, too,
Seems
by the
like
way.
It. Yeah.
He is just, the word mensch was invented for Paul. And I just, once again, something, fell into my lap. And I met this kid out in Vegas a few months ago. And a friend said, would you sit with him, talk to him and all this? And we were up in New York the last couple of days, and everybody was blown away by this kid. So I don't know where it's going to go. Like I said, I had dinner with Simon Kirke last night, and I said, listen to this. It's not my music. I mean, it's very today pop. It's very different from the pop that Herman's and shit that I couldn't get enough of. And I didn't know if it was any good. And we go over to a record label, and they're going, "We really like this. What else do you have?" And then we went to see a couple publishers, and they're same thing. Wow, this is we could find syncs for a lot of these songs, And then Simon Kirke says, "I want to produce this record. I love this stuff."
Wow. Can we say his name or not yet?
Yeah, Joey Bierbeck is his name.
Joey Bierbeck.
He's in Chicago kid.
Do you still work with Dickey Betts? Is he okay?
Yeah, I saw Dickey a few weeks ago.
You did? Okay.
Yeah. Dickey's health isn't what it used to be. He's really happy right now. He discovered YouTube and literally sits and watches bluegrass on YouTube 24/7. He'll never be able to play again.
No. Okay.
He's pretty much tethered to the couch. He's on oxygen all the time, and but he was so happy. It was so good to see him so happy, and his son is doing incredibly well.
Yes. Yeah,
that makes him happy. And one of his daughters moved around the corner from him, so he's got the grandkids all the time, and she's there all the time. And Dwayne just bought a piece of property down near where he is, so he's going to build a house there. And everybody, he's very excited to have everybody together again.
That's great. I met him once. I got to introduce him at a show in Connecticut, and I met him backstage, and I said, "Dickey, can you just tell me the Elizabeth Reed story?" Because I know he probably is asked it all the time. And he told me the story, and my jaw dropped. I'm like, Dickey Betts is telling me the story in memory of Elizabeth Reed.
He told it like it was the first time he ever told it.
He did. It was so great. Yeah.
That's how he was. He wanted to make you feel special.
Yeah.
I'm sharing this with you,
Yeah.
And it was really, he was always very, very good at making people comfortable around him. But when I first started with him, everybody I knew told me, "You're crazy." I mean, this guy got thrown out of the Allman Brothers for doing drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, come on,
Yeah.
Everybody said, "Don't do it. Don't do it." And I went down and I spent 2 days with him. And it was like we'd known each other for 100 years.
Wow.
Yeah, we still talk, at least twice a week or so.
That's cool. How about websites that we want to direct people to? I reached out to you on Facebook, and I got lucky, right? Because you said I'm really not on Facebook that much.
Yeah. Oh, no, well, I don't do that. What is it? The messenger thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I check that every now and then because sometimes there's somebody like you that says, "Hey, I'm trying to find you."
Yeah.
I'm on Facebook every day. I find post my pictures, of what just happened.
David, this is so great. I couldn't wait to talk radio with you, but I knew there was a whole lot of other stuff to talk about. You got quite a career.
We never got to Cat Stevens or Harry Nilsson.
I know.
Ian Hunter.
I got to have you
That's
back
why you
on
got to
again.
get the book.
You got to get the book. You got to get the book.
Yeah, it's all in there. It's all in there.
Yeah. All right, David Spero, thanks so much.
Thanks, Eric.
That's it. It's in the books.